Good evening, everybody. My name's Nathan Miller. I participated in a couple of, this being Skeptic Track, I've participated in a couple of skeptical projects, written for Doubtful News a couple of times. That's Sharon Hill's website. I've participated in a couple of Wikipedia projects, Guerrilla Skeptics on Wikipedia, or GSAL project, and a couple of others. And so I've spent about 3 years working as a tech support for an academic library, and after graduating, I spent another 6 years managing information technology for said research library. So I've got about 9 years of research library experience, although not as a librarian, more granting access to patrons and making sure that they have access to research journals and all of the online students and everything. And nowadays I'm an engineer, and so I kind of do other stuff. But upon graduating with my master's, I noted, and I saw it coming, but as soon as I walked across the stage at graduation, my information access changed. So quick disclaimer, so I'm going to be talking about paywalls. So hands up, who knows what a paywall is or has experienced them? Most people? Okay. We'll get into that. So it's going to be talking about accessing subscription-based content, and sometimes one of the main issues is that you're trying to work within copyright law. And so a lot of talks, a lot of papers that I've seen written on this topic list saying, they've got a little disclaimer at the beginning saying, okay, we're going to list a whole bunch of ways that people get around paywalls. We don't advocate any of these, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Then they proceed to give you a helpful list of URLs. I'm going to discuss a couple of those, but this isn't actually going to be one of those talks. Again, I'm going to mention a whole bunch of different resources. They're not necessarily all endorsements. Some of them might be. I'll try and make that clear. I'm not affiliated with any of them except where I specify. I don't own them. This is starting to sound a little bit like a fan fiction intro. I don't own the characters. And furthermore, damn it, Jim, I'm an engineer, not an attorney. I don't actually give legal advice. So you might be wondering, so this paywalls, information access, subscriptions to journals, that kind of thing, this seems like a library problem. It doesn't seem, this seems like like maybe a faculty problem. It doesn't seem to me like a scientific skepticism issue. And the way I see it is that, much like the esteemed Tim Farley, in case you can't see it, I'll read it out loud here. He says, skepticism is the intersection of science education and consumer protection. We help people learn from science to avoid spending their money on products and services that do not work. And so according to Tim Farley, he's fantastic, active skeptic, runs whatstheharm.net, recommend checking it out. He basically creates this Venn diagram between science education and consumer advocacy. And in the middle, that is scientific skepticism. Pretty much no more, no less. And I see that as part of the mission, especially in terms of information access issues, because we as skeptics are striving to be good consumers and evaluators of information. And if we can't get to the best information, then we're not going to be very good in that aim. And we're not going to be able to enable others to do so. So again, we place a high value on quality, peer-reviewed information resources, and again, as I was saying, we try to be better consumers of information and help others be better consumers. So that means that access to these resources is really important, but it's often a challenge because, as I've said before, we spend time in college, some of us spend time in college, we learn to use all these fancy research databases, amazing search strategies and tools, and then we walk across the stage at graduation and that student ID, or we leave academia and that faculty ID goes away, and suddenly we find that that access changes. And usually we experience this when we encounter a paywall, or research just interrupt us here. Has anybody seen one of these before? Blocking as they're doing their literature search. Yeah. So Kyle Sanders, who writes a Carbon comic, did kind of a commentary on this issue. A guy comes back and he finds that he no longer has access to everything he used to as an alumnus necessarily. It's kind of a lighthearted look at it, but it's something that happens to a lot of people. So I'm going to be talking about basically some solutions so that we're not this guy in the comic here. One of the things that I ran into a lot as working IT for a library is even one of our biggest security problems was a few local engineering firms at the university I worked at. We'd start seeing their VPNs pop up on our proxy servers, and just maintaining sessions for hours and hours, and sometimes days at a time, downloading journals from downloading papers from paywalled journals. And we ended up having to call those firms and saying, look, we know you've got one of our students logged in and you're grabbing all these papers, because downloading terabytes worth of information, you're probably not reading that in a weekend. This takes a kind of a lighthearted look at it, but oftentimes it's these subscriptions are expensive and people steal access to it. So I'm going to be talking about some solutions and some of the ways that they've been implemented in the skeptic movement. Some of you may be in here because you're following kind of the skeptic track. Some of you might have just seen the description and seen, I experience paywalls, so I'm going to try and address some of these for everybody. We're going to be discussing how to work with your local research libraries, your university libraries. That relationship doesn't have to end when you graduate. I'm going to talk about leveraging some of the content that we already fund and we already pay for by leveraging the Federal Depository Library Program and other government information sources. Going to be talking about more than just Google as a good discovery tool. And then, paywalls, we have a couple of issues to talk about. There's open access publishing, which we'll find out is kind of a mixed bag. And we'll talk about both ways that actually make the problem worse when people try to get around paywalls, and, or at least in my opinion, make it worse. And we're also going to talk about how to work with collection developers to overcome those paywall challenges in a way that makes it easier for the person that comes after you as well. And then with each of these main points, I'm going to be talking about some applications in scientific skepticism that either I or and some other groups have implemented these techniques in service of. So, life after a student ID. Sad day. All right, so research libraries. Fortunately, a lot of them have alumni programs. They're not as robust as the resources available to students in a lot of cases, but you don't actually even have to be a student necessarily to benefit from a university library card. I tend to collect them myself. I think I have a separate wallet just for my library cards, and it gets a little bulky. But they also establish research libraries tend to establish partnerships with community and regional public libraries, so they have kind of reciprocal borrowing agreements. And a lot of, even if you're not a student, if you check a research library's website for a local university, they often have what will be referred to as research guides. Some of them call them libguides. Generally, it's just kind of a section of strategies for, typically broken up by research topics. So if you're a bio major, if you're a chemistry person, et cetera, or an engineer, depending on your discipline of engineering, they'll have different research guide collections to choose from, and that'll get you started on your path. And if you show up in person, it's not quite as convenient as having a student ID to log in, but if you show up in person, you can usually find a very patient reference librarian who feels your pain and will work with you, often regardless of whether or not you have a membership or are a student there. So if you happen to get a library card for an academic library, pretty much every academic library I've been in has interlibrary loans, as well as even a lot of community libraries have interlibrary loans, which also borrow from universities. It's typically, it's on a voluntary regional basis, so the relationships may kind of vary depending on what region you're in. And my favorite tool for determining, if you're looking for a particular resource, is to use WorldCat. It's a pretty nice tool, and it'll tell you what libraries have the resources that you're looking for, and if you've got location enabled, how close they are to you. So as far as discovery tools go, pretty much everybody's familiar with Google. A lot of people are probably familiar with Google Scholar, but not everybody. When I see Google Scholar, literally it's just scholar.google.com. What that does is it searches the full text record of a lot of academic papers. Some of them great, some of them less so. But it's often a good stepping stone to try and find the papers that you're looking for. Sometimes they'll have even linked to an archive full text that's not at the location of the journal that you're trying to get to, even though it'll be the same full text. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Within your libraries, this is mostly just going to be university libraries. They have what's referred to as federated search tools. They'll probably call it by a brand name. I know a really popular one is like Serial Solutions. I think they call theirs Summon. But they generally, most universities tend to brand it themselves, so it'll just be like search the whole library. Their reach will actually be kind of dependent on the subscriptions that the library that you're at has. But yeah, so you typically, if you're at their website, look for an option to search entire collection or search whole library. It'll look at not only their library catalog, but also their database holdings. So if you need to get to an article, an issue of Nature, you can at least find out if the university library that you are looking at has that issue. Some software tools started as basically reference managers and have grown from there. ReadCube, I think I started using it when it was just a reference manager, but they've kind of expanded their reach into being a discovery tool, and they even have kind of it's still a pay to enter access to subscriptions, but it's often a lot cheaper than that $34.95 to get a single paper. So a lot of trade publications that are subscription based will tend to cite research that is publicly funded. So it might be a good idea to, if you can find out the references used by a paywalled resource, if they ended up citing, say, a government study, you might want to just skip that article for now, postpone that, and then just get to the data or the government document that they based their work on anyway. Now they might have added value, and you might want to come back to that paper, but if the goal is to get to the information, it might be a good idea to try and leverage, say, the National Archives or the Federal Depository Library program to try and get to that information earlier. Oftentimes, it's with government documents, certain government publications are statutorily required to be made available to the public. So in this case, any information access issues are not actually financial or copyright limited. They're going to be basically an information access issue that's really an information literacy issue. And it's just a matter of navigating to get that information. So if you were, say, a blue crab fisherman, you might be interested in, say, a NOAA study that was done using NOAA dreg surveys of different regions. That might be helpful to get to, and that's probably what the trade publications are going to be basing their research on anyway. So I'm going to talk about an application in skepticism using government documents. So I was a bit of a token skeptic on campus when I was a university student. Anybody who was a token skeptic, any experience being that person? Scully, I know you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so we had a student chapter of IEEE, that's the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, and they had a guest speaker. His name was Rocky, and he was a really enthusiastic speaker, and as kind of the token skeptic of the group, I went along, and he had lots of anecdata about various sightings. I don't want to, pick on the guy. He's not here, but he was very careful and meticulous in gathering information from his trusted sources, and he made Xerox copies for all of us, and that's so he passed them out, and he gave us some Roswell documents. He gave us some all highly classified, but now since declassified information that were part of this set of documents that he wanted us to examine and to prove the case that we'd been visited by extraterrestrials and that they were actually responsible for most of our modern technology. We didn't actually invent transistors. It was actually it was kind of handed to us by extraterrestrials on high. And so it kind of sucks to be the guys who worked on that personally. I kind of feel like, because they get kind of a short end of the stick there. But anyway, the centerpiece of his presentation were these documents, which I loved, because as I told him after the talk, it's really fortuitous because we were sitting in the largest federal depository library in the southeast region. So it'd be very interesting to see what looking into some of these documents and kind of see what our government documents librarian had to say about them. And so they were pretty well known. That it's in UFO conspiracy theory circles as the Majestic 12 documents. They're purportedly having Harry Truman authorizing this program to basically cover up our collaboration or either collaboration with the aliens or that we got one of their craft and are using it. So first, a word about the Federal Depository Library Program. We have access to them, to government publications made available to the public at no cost. They're usually not great reads in terms of like character development, or although that may change in the near future. I don't know, It's overseen by the Government Publishing Office. Actually, when I first created this presentation, it was the Government Printing Office. But they're getting with the times, I guess. And if you go to gpo.gov/libraries, you can locate the nearest federal depository library. And if you can get to one of those, you're going to want to talk to a government documents librarian, because they'll be able to help you navigate the maze that is federal documents. So in addition to the federal depository libraries, we have the National Archives, and they provide government publications, information guidelines, document indexes. Those are things that you can usually download or search a little bit more in depth. And USA.gov is actually itself just kind of a portal to every other federal agency's search portal. So it's kind of, it's the government's own federated search engine, which is kind of handy. So this isn't just for UFOs. This can be used for medical, agricultural, and a host of other documents related to scientific skepticism or whatever else you're working on. So, but what about these majestic 12 documents? Well, as I was helpfully advised by our government documents librarian, they actually are not in the federal depository library system for reasons we'll encounter soon. In 1988, the FBI actually investigated a report of these documents because, as you may have noticed, they're a little bit highly marked in terms of their classification. Now, the fact that I'm showing this that says top secret on here probably is a spoiler for how the story ends. But so the FBI they weren't necessarily equipped to answer every question about this document. So they passed the investigation off to the U.S. Air Force. And U.S. Air Force, they did their own if you go to the National Archives after this and read some of the memos as they were passing it back and forth, it's kind of an amusing read. Yeah, if you work for the government, everything, all your memos back and forth could end up in in one of these releases. So as you're laughing about how ridiculous the document that you're looking at is, you might end up getting quoted. So they were able to determine that it was a hoax, and so the document in question, the initial report, all of the investigative documents, and all the correspondence related thereto were made available by the Bureau in response to a Freedom of Information Act request. Those are really handy. I'm not going to cover them here. They could be their own panel discussion or presentation. But the National Archives, in this case, maintains a special collection because these are frequently requested documents. So, again, spoiler alert, if you look at the documents, they look like they've been Xeroxed, faxed, and then Xeroxed, and then faxed again, which is actually probably an argument in their favor as far as it being a federal document. But there has been some annotative commentary by the FBI and Air Force in the released documents, and it's FOIA request 348053 if you're interested in. So again, just to reiterate and to take it back from the skeptic, conspiracy theory stuff, most government documented related information access issues are really just information literacy issues, but it's not easy to navigate all the time, which is why I recommend getting with a government documents librarian or a reference librarian. Those guys are heroes. But yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people, that information was available, and my friend Rocky, who visited the IEEE group, would have benefited from that kind of literature search. Now, I'm not saying that I debunked, UFOs, because this is really just as, if you were here for the previous presentation, I think Bob could tell you that this is really just evidence that the conspiracy is even deeper within the Air Force and the FBI and the librarians.
They got the librarians too.
They're tricky. But again, getting back to paywalls. So that was a nice little segue. But that was a nice little deviation in using government documents. Sometimes you don't need to get past the paywall if you can use the government documents that are being cited by the paywall content. But let's say we've encountered a paywall in the wild. Well, what is a paywall? So most people are in this room are already familiar with them. It's restricting access to internet content using a paid subscription. So what we just saw there was what's known as a hard paywall. It requires paid subscription before you access any of the paper except probably like the abstract or the reference list. Soft paywalls are another type. They're the metered model, and they usually allow a specific number of pages to be viewed or articles to be read before they eventually pop up and they present you with the option to pay to continue. So if you're reading news articles, you might see something like this pop up. You've got 2 slides remaining before you all have to register. So most paywalled academic content is actually the former. It's the hard paywall. So let's talk a little bit about. So what if some publishers found a way to abandon the paywall, and would that mean that we win? So I'm going to talk a little bit about open access publishing. Is anybody here familiar with open access publishing? All right. So it's got a couple of faces to it. So on the one hand, it provides unrestricted online access to peer-reviewed scholarly research. It lets researchers kind of collaborate a little bit more easily when they're able to read each other's work. Moreover, what it also does, though, is it shifts the publication cost from you, the reader, to the author. So some people don't necessarily refer to it as open access publishing. They refer to it as pay-to-play publishing. And so these journals, they're ostensibly peer-reviewed. So it's not always that cut and dry. Sometimes some real stinkers of a paper get through, especially, and there might not be any review process at all if a publisher is what we call a predatory publisher, who will basically say, hey, for $5,000, we'll print anything you want to put into our journal, and you can put it on your CV, and it'll look good for you, and it'll get you readers, and but most of them will actually at least say that they're peer-reviewed. So some researchers have decided to put that to the test. There are a couple of software tools. My favorites are SciGen and MathGen. They're open source tools that just they generate random gobbledygook that sounds like a computer science or a math paper. And they're pretty good. If you just look at it and just read a couple sentences, well, if you're a computer scientist, it'll be really obvious really fast. But if you're a novice, it'll look like a really good paper. It'll be properly formatted. I'm pretty sure the MathGen uses LaTeX. So I mean, it's the formatting's beautiful, all the equations are properly indexed, and you can generate the most meaningless paper of any length that you want. So in 2013, a few open access journals were tested using this method, and they accepted the spoof articles. Subscription journals aren't entirely off the hook, though. A couple of such as IEEE and Springer in 2014 accepted a couple of those papers as well. As far as some of the open access predatory publishers, some of my favorite non-SciGen or MathGen examples was a collaborative paper between Lisa Simpson and an Edna Krabappel. And then there was it's past 9. There was another scholarly paper that was sent in to a journal that bombarded researchers with mailing list requests to go ahead and publish in our journal. And he published a paper entitled, "Get Me Off Your Fucking Mailing List." The abstract went, "Get me off your fucking mailing list, get me off your fucking mailing list, get me off your I won't go into his conclusion, but it was definitive. And they printed it. So furthermore, when we talk about open access publishing, there are actually 2 open access publishing models. There's the gold open access model and the green open access model, and my preference will become obvious to you very shortly. So with gold open access, the author pays for the content to be published, and they shoulder the entire burden. And if you've encountered a paywall, this sounds like your dream come true, because the readers just get unfettered access to the content. So on the surface, this is a great idea if you can fork over the cash at the outset to get it published and you're actually peer reviewed. The green open access model is a little bit more nuanced. So the journal itself could be subscription based. So I might pay to access that journal. But the author or institution retains the right to make a self-archived copy available. They can make that copy available on a university archive, some other archiving service, or they can provide it to somebody who requests a self-archived copy. If you encountered a paywalled green open access journal, the resource you're looking at, even though you're encountering a paywall, might be available in an open access archive or repository. So I'm going to take a personal example. I was writing a commentary on a news story for Doubtful News. Again, Sharon Hill writes Doubtful News, awesome website. If you want to read about the weird news before the rest of the internet has commented on it. Astronomy Magazine had an article, and they ended up citing the basis of their article was a paywalled article. And I wanted to get to the content before I started writing my opinions on it. But it was, as you can see here, Physical Review D is a paywall journal, and I was offered the opportunity to subscribe for a modest fee. But I'm a cheapskate. And I happen to know that, or rather I was able to determine, and we'll see how in just a second, that that particular journal was a green open access publication, which meant that the author was able to archive a pre-publication copy. And archive.org, it's spelled arxiv.org. It's hosted by Cornell University. There are several different repositories like this one. I kind of like them because you can actually get papers posted before their publication sometimes. It'll be sometimes a pre-review copy. And it's not a guarantee of peer review, but they do actually moderate the archive to make sure that it's of refereeable quality, according to them. So as you can see, research repository archives are a skeptic's best friend. They're so amazing that multiple groups of people have taken that idea and run with it. So one example, so let's say that I'm a researcher. So this is another caveat for the self-archived journals or journal articles. Researchers who can't publish in peer-reviewed publications have their own resources to go to if they want to archive their work in a research repository. So such like VIXRA, which you might notice conveniently is archive spelled backwards. Here's an example. It's a paper, an academic paper on categorizing different types of dowsable fields. So they cater to a very specific type of audience, and they'll accept all submissions. So I could get my presentation into there. So I don't know. So with Green Open Access allows you to contact authors. So a lot of authors are busy. They might not even know necessarily the status of the journal that they published in. So my recommendation, if you encounter a paywalled paper like this one, you can check with a tool like Sherpa/Romeo. Actually, don't recall the, but you could write that one down and Google it, or archive it, well, without the A in front, and it's .it, so it's like an Italian server. To see these tools, basically, you query a publisher, and they will check. They keep an archive of what those publishers' Green Open Access status is. So if I have a paper that I want to get to, and I find out that it's being distributed by a Green Open Access publisher, like in this case, just as an example, Elsevier, the author might be able to give me a copy if I request it without violating the publisher's rights. So, as an example, if the author happens to have a ResearchGate account, you can even just submit a request for that paper, and it will contact the author for you. And I recommend doing that if it's published in a Green Open Access journal. In this case, I wanted to get to a commentary that was written in a journal in response to a quack who had published in a pediatric neurological journal, and the author ended up sending me a self-archived copy of the paper, and now it's made available on ResearchGate. And so that was really handy, and I think that went into a packet to one of my congressmen. So another strategy, if you've encountered paywalled content, it's not something that you can get a pre-published archive copy of, is to become a Wikipedia editor. A lot of people don't know this, but if you're a Wikipedia editor and you are legitimately working on a Wikipedia article on the subject, you can go to what's called the Wikipedia Resource Exchange. Again, if you get content that way, it's only valid for Wikipedia purposes, and you're not permitted to publish, pass on to others, use commercially, or otherwise use the verbatim content in anything else. So basically, if you request paywalled content through the Wikipedia Resource Exchange, you're promising, I am pinky swear, I'm working on a Wikipedia article on this topic. And the way I see it is, isn't it worth access to the paywalled content to improve Wikipedia and maybe help move that along in the right direction? So another scientific skepticism-oriented group that has utilized a lot of these methods for kind of working around and within paywalls is a very, very aggressively named but immensely helpful user group called Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. It was founded in 2011 by Susan Gerbic. And basically it's a user group for brand new Wikipedia editors, especially those interested in scientific skepticism, and helping them to learn the rules and formats and everything associated with Wikipedia to improve the pages. And they also engage in what are called, on Wikipedia, edit-a-thons. A Wikipedia edit-a-thon is where a group of interested editors attempt to expand Wikipedia on a specific niche topic. So again, if you get involved in one of these groups, or if you consult the Wikipedia Resource Exchange, you can actually get access to quite a bit of content that you might not have otherwise been able to find. So now I'm going to talk about how not to do it. So a lot of people tend to crowdsource their information access. So I can't get to this paper. Hey, you know, somebody on the internet has access to this. Could you email it to me, please? Or could you upload it to BitTorrent or something like that? And there are a bunch of, I'm not going to put URLs up here. One that I'm going to look at is the ICANHasPDF hashtag on Twitter. Basically, the site users request material, and somebody who has access will just, oh, here, I'll send it your way, which seems helpful on the outset. One of the problems is that, of course, there's the obvious legal implications of violating copyright, and but the thing that really ticks me off about this one is that your resource request doesn't get properly documented. So, Jean Liu, back in 2013, I think she revisited it again with similar results in 2014, took a random sampling of users of the ICANHasPDF hashtag. And she broke it down based on text in the user's profile, tried to determine what type of user each one was. And 59% of users using the ICANHasPDF hashtag to request content based on their Twitter profiles were members of universities and research institutions that had access through interlibrary loan or their own subscriptions to the content they were requesting. So, with roughly 60% of its users being people that are scholars in the first place, that results in a kind of an imbalance in terms of resource requests with their library, with their own university libraries. Yes, sir?
Why in heaven's, if you're not looking for some kind of government secret, why in heaven's name would any university not tell everyone, sure, go ahead and print all you want at X cents a page?
I would say they do, or at least they try to. One of the tough things that I encountered, even working as an IT professional who helped students and faculty get access to this, is they don't often know what they have. And the libraries work really hard and they try and shout from the rooftops what resources they have in their collections. And well, I mean, if it's 3 a.m. and your term paper's due tomorrow, you might end up consulting Twitter. Who knows? But I'm going to say, even if you know that your library doesn't have whatever resource you're looking for, make sure you ask them for it. Because one of two things is going to happen. Number one, you didn't realize they had it and they have it. And now you have it. So, the story's over there. Or number two, they don't have it, but now they know they need to get it. So in library collection development, what's referred to as turnaways or unfulfilled requests the library can't fill, they're actually documented. So, and also, journals that aren't used are also documented. Or rather, their lack of use is noted. And libraries are under pretty tight budgets these days. And so every year they have to go through weeding processes. Okay. So if your information access need isn't documented, then how will anybody actually help you meet it? But it's just one request. It's just one request. And some people aren't sure of the value of, well, is it really that important that I, document using a specific resource? And if you doubt the impact of even a single checkout or a single reference request, I would look at a library system in Orlando last year in September. In September 2016, 2 employees of the Orlando Library, these were dedicated librarians. Now, you can argue as to how far it should have gone, but what they did was they determined, we're in kind of a user-lose scenario with our content. So they created a fake user who only used underutilized materials. And it worked for a while, and it preserved some resources. But, I hope that we can strive for a world where librarians don't feel they have to do this to keep resources available to the public. So you can document your request using a variety of tools. One of my favorites is, let's say last-ditch effort, your reference librarian can't help you. Check out the open access button or some other similar tool. They're an open source project to document the impact of paywalls. And if you install their widget in your browser, if you encounter a paywall, while you're at the paywall, you hit the button, it'll document it, and it will go through the whole process of everything I've been telling you about contacting the author and seeing if we can get a pre-publication archive, or it'll contact the publisher and ask, hey, in this case, can we make an exception? So they'll basically use every technique I've talked about. If you want to follow open access news, you can check out the Harvard Open Access Tracking Project. They not only follow, make available a news feed, but they also they'll consult with universities and authors to figure out the best way to publish, to also be good for their career as well. Some additional resources: professional memberships. If you happen to be a member of a professional organization, I'm a member of a couple of them myself. Those can be helpful to get access to journals you might not realize you had access to. Employers, I'd be really careful about using if your employer subscribes to a journal. You might want to check your company's policy on non-work related research projects, especially if they kind of have a pay-per-view relationship. So just use that judiciously and ethically, and ask your company. Deep Dive is trying to be a sort of a Netflix of scholarly publishing. I did a trial with them. They'll stop you from printing and throw a couple of other things in your way to make it really inconvenient because they really think you're going to pirate. I don't know. They probably don't think that, but so let's just run through a quick scenario. Say we hit a paywall, and we're going to try some of the techniques that we've talked about. So let's say I want a paper, and specifically I want this paper, but it's I don't want to pay $35.95 to access it. So first, I'm going to assume that it's available only by subscription. So I've got academic libraries, community libraries, professional memberships, employer access possibly, and if that fails, the Wikipedia Resource Exchange. If those are not available to me, or I'm actually even just start here, we'll just assume I can't access any of those subscription resources. We'll just assume, we'll take a look, is it open access? It might not be apparent that it's green open access. And if it's green open access, then we have the option for a pre-publication print copy through either archive, institutional repository archives, etc. We might be able to sneak a copy out of Google Scholar, and really, by that I mean Google Scholar will have archived one that's legally accessible. So in this case, we find that the paper is written, it's published by a green open access publisher, and I personally contacted the author of the paper as well, and he provided me with a copy as well, but I figured that the archive.org fits our example. So what if you're still a student? You haven't quite walked across the aisle or the stage at graduation yet, or you're still affiliated with the university and you might not be in the future. Well, I've got really good news. You might want to check with your library for their alumni policy. Sometimes having a student account allows you to create an account that will remain active after or valid after you're no longer a student. So some of those, some of that access might survive graduation. Get to know your reference librarians. Make sure that they know who you are, and stay involved with campus groups. So basically, the takeaway is research libraries are your community partners, as well as the local regional libraries. Check the government printing office or publishing office for any government documents or state-sponsored research that we've already paid for. Discoveries tools are often your friends, so Google Scholar, federated searches at your university. Open access, it's got some flaws, but it may allow you to get a copy of even subscription-based papers. But just be aware that pay-to-play predatory publishers can poison the well. Some ways of getting around the paywall, as tempting as they might be, actually make the problem worse. And I'd rather work with collection developers to overcome paywall challenges. And all of these references will also be available. You can also find at scholastical.wordpress.com. So, thank you.